Thank you, Jeff. Yes, my name's Sheryl Bagwell. I'm from ABC Radio National Breakfast, which is, just to get into a quick plug, presented by Frank Kelly each morning from 6 a.m. to 8:30. And of course, like the rest of the media, we're gearing up for the federal election, which could, as they say, be called any day now, another cliche. It's probably just a formality, as I think we can say the election campaign has well and truly begun. Today we have the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, giving a keynote speech at the National Press Club in Canberra, and she's going to focus, we're told, on the economy and on jobs, an issue that Julia Gillard says, of course, is very close to her heart. Now, she really does have a lot to boast about. There's no doubt that Australia's in a sweet spot relative to the rest of the world, as we saw in the figures in the government's economic update yesterday. I mean, Australia's budget's going to be back in surplus in 3 years' time, well ahead of, or comfortably ahead of other major advanced economies. Our net debt is going to be a fraction of the rest of the rich world, and our unemployment rate is half that of the United States. You know, good management or good fortune, it's probably a bit of both, but regardless of the reason, I mean, there's no doubt that Australia is doing, you know, very, very well. I mean, we can have a debate now, not about whether companies are profitable, but how much of those extraordinary profits should be handed back to the government. I'm talking about the mining tax. Of course, there are pockets of disadvantage in the community, particularly among Indigenous Australians. But most of us, though, I mean, we are much better off than we were a decade ago. So why don't Australians think that they are better off? I mean, we're always talking about rising house prices. The quality of life isn't as good as it was in previous generations. Too many foreigners coming into the country by boat, when of course the numbers are just a fraction of the number of people seeking asylum in sort of Europe and the United States. Is it because we suspect that the vast wealth that we're generating is going to the few rather than the many? Are governments doing enough to come up with policies that address this perceived widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots? And are we doing enough to ensure disadvantage doesn't continue into the next generation? Well, these are all issues that our panel will be tackling this morning. The title is A Stake in the Economy, A Stake in the Economy for All, Delivering a Fair Share. And we'll go straight to Peter Crone, who's the Chief Economist with the Business Council of Australia, considered to be the peak business lobby group for Australia's major blue chip companies. I mean, Peter can obviously bring to us the perspective of the big end of town. So I guess the question is, Peter, why is it that many Australians feel this growing economic prosperity is coming at the cost of a quality of life? Is it because they feel most of this increased wealth is going to CEOs and senior executives? Over to you.
Well, thanks, Sheryl, and thanks for having me here today. About 10 years ago, almost to the week, I attended the Reserve Bank's annual conference, which had as its theme the Australian economy in the 1990s. I happened to share a car with Ted Evans and Ken Henry, and we were talking about various things, including what happens if Alan Greenspan gets it wrong, what might happen with the US's large current account deficit. But we also discussed a dinner address that Paul Kelly had delivered to the conference. And in his address, he said that economic and social policy needed to be better integrated, and that the task for economic reformers is to explain how their policies will lead to a better society, not just a better economy. Sound familiar? Anyway, it's instructive to consider how we've fared over the 10 years that have elapsed since Paul Kelly delivered those remarks. You can see that Australia's population's grown by about 3 million people. GDP per capita has increased from 47,700 to just under 55,000. Average weekly ordinary time earnings on an annualised basis grown from 40,700 to just under 65,000. The minimum wage has increased from 20,800 to 29,700. Interestingly, the minimum wage has actually increased at a faster rate than faster pace than the rate of inflation, but as a percentage of average weekly earnings, it's declined slightly from 51.3% to 45.9%. The other economists here will understand that OOT is not necessarily the best measure of wages because there are compositional impacts that can have an effect. I've pulled out some income distribution numbers from the ABS. They're slightly dated. they've shown that there's been a marginal increase in income inequality as measured by the Gini coefficient. We might come back and talk to that point a bit later. Overall, there are generally a pretty good set of economic indicators, and I think in 10 years' time, if we were able to replicate those results, we wouldn't be too unhappy. But notwithstanding what are generally good headline indicators, concerns persist by many about the quality of life in Australia. The BCA recently commissioned research on the economic and social aspirations of Australians, which confirmed the existence of this modern paradox. While most people think the economy was improving and that a strong economy is important to Australia, they did not necessarily see stronger growth contributing to their quality of life or financial security. Key sentiments picked up were that while material standards of living are assessed to be higher now, the gap between rich and poor was perceived to have become wider, our emotional well-being was perceived to be lower, and the percentage of people being left behind socially was perceived to have risen. People identified significant concerns about the adequacy of superannuation, cost of living, housing affordability for them and their children, the availability of jobs, and the work-life balance. In terms of community perceptions about the national interest, health was seen as the most important issue facing Australia today, followed by the economy. Amongst older people, the touchstone issues were in order health, water shortages and immigration, while for younger people, the issues were jobs, housing affordability, education and skills training. But more optimistically, one key result from this analysis was a very strong sense from people that economic and social aspirations can and should be pursued together. People seem to realise that economic growth provides the capacity to deal with wider issues. They just don't think that it's been achieved successfully to date or in a way that's relevant to their lives. So this is a question for us. How can the benefits of growth be better communicated, and how can the business community better connect with the national interest? In recent weeks, the Business Council of Australia has outlined a building blocks approach that might be put into practice to deliver social prosperity and a better quality of life in Australia. The first block recognises that the centrality of economic growth is a foundation on which to build living standards. What we've done is taken Treasury's 3 Ps framework that recognises that in the long run, the economic growth we achieve will reflect the combined impact of productivity growth, employment growth and changes in hours worked. I don't propose to go into this issue just now. Andrew's touched on it earlier, and I'm sure a lot of the issues are well known to you around what drives growth. But I'd just highlight 2 points. One, that from a business perspective, it is about increasing productivity, and that happens at both the firm and the organisation level. And also from a business perspective, there are commercial issues about maximising the participation.